Blazor and IoT with John.Callaway.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm serving companies using .NET and Azure and other Microsoft technologies. We build mission-critical software and rescue failing projects, empowering software delivery with a proven approach. And we are in the second year of my architect forums. You can sign up for the next session now. And if you lead a software team in any capacity and are looking to collaborate with peers out there in the industry, you can sign up at the link. We'll include it in the show notes as well. And we have the architect forum and the executive software leadership forum, one for the more technical direct leader audience and one for the more managerial audience. So those are great and happen on a monthly basis, and I facilitate those, and those are fun conversations. And for those looking for Programming with Palermo, my video podcast, just search for it in any of the directories, and you'll be able to find it. My guest today on the show is John.Callaway. He is an international speaker and author and has received many Microsoft MVP awards. He has been a professional developer since 1999, focusing primarily on web technologies. And currently, he specializes in C# and .NET in Azure. Clean code and professionalism are particularly important to him, as well as mentoring and teaching others what he's learned along the way. He was a podcaster for several years at the Six Figure Developer Podcast, and he's available for independent and freelance software consulting work and enjoys speaking and presenting on various topics. You can contact him at john.callaway@outlook.com, and we'll include a link to that in the show notes. John, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Thank you, Jeffrey. Glad to be here. Doing well.
Awesome. Glad to have you on the show. You had me as a guest on your Six Figure Developer Podcast, and that was a great time. Now I can have you on mine. I want to kind of dive into Blazor and IoT and some of the things that you're doing there. But I always like to ask the guests on the show, you've been doing programming for quite a while. If you back up a little bit, what are some of the key things that have happened in your career that were very meaningful, that kind of steered you into what you work on day in and day out these days?
Sure. Yeah, I've always been interested in computers at a very young age. In our elementary school, we had the Apple IIe and learned very, very, very basic programming on those machines, and got into software development right after college, and joined a small firm and had to really get up to speed very, very quickly. Some notable points in my career were when I met Clayton Hunt at a mutual company, and he's one of the co-hosts on the Six Figure Developer Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And he was learning test-driven development and brought that into our project where we were working. And he and I kind of developed a kinship and developed the processes that we continue today. And so, learning test-driven development, learning clean code, really upping our skills and treating this work we do as a craft.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. TDD shaped so many lives of so many people. So that's awesome. I learned about your RetroPie project, and I was looking into that, and that was the genesis. Like, man, I gotta get him on the show to talk about this story, because not only have my kids actually played the games on the RetroPie and have set that up and connect to a TV, but just some of the tech that you're using and kind of the new angle. We'll include a link to the GitHub project, but to start, can you share with the listeners, what is the RetroPie Manager project?
Sure. So actually, let's back up a little bit further and just explain what what the Raspberry Pi is. So the Raspberry Pi is a very small form factor computer. It's about the size of a credit card, a little bit taller uh, to to allow for some of the peripherals to plug in. But there's a project out there called RetroPie, and it's a game emulation station, and you can emulate different gaming systems like Atari, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, early PlayStation, and Sega, and others, PC emulation games as well. And I first learned about this project many years ago when my son was still very young, and tried to get him interested in retro games. He was
Hmm.
interested in at the time in the newer games that were coming out. But I wanted to kind of share with him the games that I grew up on, and installed RetroPie on a Raspberry Pi 3, I believe.
Hmm.
One of the earlier lower powered uh, modules and lower powered chipsets, and so we couldn't play the games that he was used to. So everything just looked old to him.
Hmm.
So fast forward just a year or two ago, when the newer retro pies were coming available and the price was coming down after the pandemic, I renewed my interest in retro gaming and got a newer Raspberry Pi and started installing all of the ROMs for the individual games, and that required SSH into the Raspberry Pi, sharing a folder, doing something like that.
Hmm.
And that always seemed, if I wanted to get my son a little bit more interested and give him access to adding games, it was a little bit cumbersome to try to get him to connect to the Raspberry Pi and move ROMs over there and so forth. And I thought, surely there's like a web interface. And there are a couple out there, some written in Python and some other languages, and they're all available on, or for the most part, they're available on GitHub. But a lot of them have been abandoned, and a lot of them didn't have the features that I wanted. And so I started a project myself and put it out on GitHub, written in Blazor, and it's some instructions for putting the project on your Raspberry Pi, and then sharing out the web page so that you can upload and manage your ROMs through the web.
And I'm glad that you kind of backed me up, because there's plenty of listeners who don't regularly play around with Raspberry Pis, have not installed RetroPie on one of them, and connected a USB controller or whatnot. And just a quick tip, we'll include a link to it in the show notes. There's some kits where you can get Raspberry Pi with all of it loaded with tens of thousands of games and all these ROMs already loaded with UI, but then customizing it, and I don't know, because I haven't customized mine. Are there new ROMs being discovered or refurbished all the time?
There are a lot of websites out there that have collections of ROMs,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some legality issues that you really need to have purchased the game in the past.
Yeah.
So that's where I stick to those that I've you know had experience with and have paid for in the past, and move those over. But you can find thousands upon thousands of games available online.
Well, that's a good point. So you and me, we have kids who are, the age, I guess, that we were when we were playing Atari and the other Nintendo and whatnot. And yeah, we had those games. That's why we
Right.
remember those games. We're like, oh, I'd like to play that game again. Let me see if I can play that game with a kid, the game that I remember playing. So you're right, the ones that you'd remember purchasing before. But, it's interesting, even though, yeah, you could download some of the others, the ones that I never played as a kid, it's like I'm not even interested in playing, because I never knew that game. But that's a good point. Keep yourself on the right side of the copyright laws.
Yes. And again, this project written in Blazor, it was just another opportunity to kind of flex my muscles and pick up some different skills, because at the time I hadn't had the opportunity in a professional setting to use Blazor for any particular project. And I saw, all of my connections on LinkedIn and Twitter, just really enjoying Blazor and Blazor WASM and Blazor Server and all the flavors out there. And also saw some Twitch streams and YouTube streams of the folks, developing different component libraries and things like that for Blazor. and I happened upon one called Fluent UI Blazor, which is the official kind of Microsoft offering of their Fluent UI library
Hmm.
for Blazor. And so
Nice.
that's what I used for the RetroPie manager, as well as a couple of other side projects along the way. And so, that's allowed me to be very productive because a lot of the components that I would use in a web application have already been produced for you. It's just a matter of wiring them up.
Okay. So this app, where does it run? Does it run directly on the Raspberry Pi, somewhere else, combination?
It runs directly on the Raspberry Pi.
Okay. There, you've got instructions there. Is it as simple as going to the terminal on the Pi and just getting it set up and running, or what's the process?
For the most part, yeah, it's just as simple as deploying it to the Raspberry Pi or logging into the Raspberry Pi and cloning the Git repository, the GitHub repository, and compiling and running the application there. I'm looking for others to contribute. If somebody wants to put in a better installer, a better experience out there and available, I've got a checklist of kind of wish list items that I would like to see done. So if anybody's looking for a fun little project or looking to get involved or looking to contribute, I would absolutely love the help.
Okay. And so it runs directly on the Pi, and so it's pulling information directly from, I guess, in the retro configuration files or database, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it's actually calling in some of the CLI commands in the controllers and in the services within the application. So it's directly interfacing with the guts of the RetroPie uh, emulation software.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another kind of thing on the wish list, is making sure that there's appropriate securities and things like that. Because the thing about RetroPie as well is it doesn't have to run on a Raspberry Pi. It can run on an old PC. It can run on an old laptop. It can run on a Mac, I believe. So I've run it on a Windows laptop and made sure that it works and all of that. So it's truly cross-platform at this point.
Okay. So for a little code break, we just run it on our own computer, on our main computer too.
Absolutely.
Or is it really meant for Linux, where you run it inside a Linux VM or on the Windows subsystem for Linux?
You can do any and all. I've also included a Docker file so that you can run it locally on your Windows machine or your whatever machine you want. You can run it in Visual Studio, in VS Code. There are instructions on there as well.
Nice, nice. Well, it might be jumping ahead too much, but you've gone kind of deep into Blazor, and you chose WebAssembly instead of Blazor server side, for something that has one user and is going to run locally on the computer anyway. What was your thought process from an architecture perspective, making the choice between those two flavors?
It was actually just a variety of different things. Actually, this one is is actually a hybrid, so it does have a WebAssembly component as well as a server-side component.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a second kind of side project that I put together that is purely WebAssembly, and that's called Used Vehicle Checklist. And
Okay.
that's just something that I put together over a weekend because I was interested in thinking about maybe purchasing a new vehicle or a new to me vehicle. And I had found some online, just printed PDF, Word document type checklists of things to look for when you're checking out a vehicle, and really didn't see anything that was truly interactive that I could type into a computer and save things. So I put together usedvehiclechecklist.com as a pure Blazor WebAssembly site and put that out there. It's hosted in Azure, and it interfaces and saves your results for the form and the checklist into local storage of the browser.
Mm.
I also had the idea that if this became popular, if folks found value in this, that maybe I could make it into a freemium type service. You could always fill out the form for a single vehicle, and if you come back days or weeks later in the same browser, all of the data is still there because it's stored in local storage of the browser. If you wanted to have more vehicles or wanted to adopt this for your used car lot for say, or adopt it for your car salesmen that are purchasing vehicles for your car lot, then maybe they could sign up and have multiple entries and things like that.
Okay. And I've got quite a few questions for that. And let's make sure we got the URL correct. Usedvehiclechecklist.com.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll include a link in the show notes. Yeah, it's online now. And so this is currently a lower volume web application. What service in Azure did you choose to be budget friendly? What'd you go with?
Right now, I'm using just a free tier of web application.
App service?
Of app service, yes.
Okay.
It is something I believe that I could have probably put into container apps or even maybe a static web app for some of the content for some of the images and things like that. But just for simplicity, I've got some dollars that are free to me monthly, so it's not it's not costing me very much to actually, it's not costing me anything to host this.
Yeah. And you mentioned that when you fill out a checklist, when you're evaluating a car that you might purchase, just to remember things, it stores data in local storage. What's the persistence life cycle of that? 'Cause web developers that are used to saving something in a database, they know, it's saved in the database on the server and it's never going to go away unless I actually delete that record. And cookies have been around for a while, but for those not familiar with local storage, how does it behave and how did you use it?
It's actually another open source project by our mutual friend David Pine with Microsoft.
Oh, nice.
He's got a library that allows you to interface with local storage just like you would with any particular file system or database technology like Entity Framework, for example. So I created a connection, so to speak, to local storage and save the results of the form information into local storage. So all of the modern browsers have this concept of local storage that that you can interact with, that your web application can interact with and save small amounts of data. And this form is relatively small in bytes and the data that we're saving there.
So how long does this stick around?
It will stay there indefinitely until or unless you go through and start manually clearing things. David Pine, and we can put the link in show notes, I'm sure. And he's got an example website that you can interact with, and if need be, you can go through and actually clear the settings in his demo application as well. So if need be, then we could also add that functionality for use vehicle checklist as well. That if you don't want to store that anymore, we could have a button on there that would destroy all the data that's being saved.
So a lot of developers have Edge and Chrome and Edge developer version and maybe Google Chrome Canary version, and sometimes go over to the incognito mode. Is local storage tied to one of those flavors? What is the scope and where is it accessible?
Yeah, the scope, to my understanding, is tied directly to the instance of the browser running, and that isn't to say that if I close the browser, it would disappear. It's if you come back later, it's been persisted to disk. So if you came back weeks later and hadn't opened the browser window in that time, as long as you're on that same computer that had that stored in that storage, you can open it in Chrome if you had entered it in Chrome. Now, if you opened the site in Edge afterwards, it wouldn't have that storage, or it wouldn't have those entries in storage. So that would be a way to be able to fill out the checklist twice, for instance, and that's perfectly fine. That if that's needed, I think that's a valuable use case.
So it's really tied. It's scoped to the browser, not to the computer user. So if I have Chrome and Edge side by side on the same website, it is not going to share local storage.
Correct.
It's not in the Windows profile or user profile. Okay. And
yeah, it's up to the individual browser provider to implement that, so that they're not sharing that between Edge and Chrome.
But if I have multiple tabs open in Edge, all those tabs would share the same local storage.
Correct. Yes.
Nice. That's just a great twist when doing web applications with WebAssembly, and I mean with any of the JavaScript frameworks as well, because it's using browser CPU, it's using browser RAM, memory, and now storage, and of course it's all scoped to a certain way. But it's good to know where you're storing data. We've seen the small databases that may come up in local storage that we may be able to put, a very SQLite, a very small SQLite version. I think that's already working. I'm not sure if there's any snafus still, but that was like an announcement that they were working on that Entity Framework, the Entity Framework team. But I hadn't heard that they had smoothed out all of the bugs or the edge cases. But I think it's coming.
Yeah, and there's an enormous amount of options out there, of course. And again, this was a weekend project that I threw up there. If it started getting traction, if it started getting traffic, then maybe I could refactor it a little bit and make it more useful and more user-friendly and more valuable to people. But I didn't want to put that effort in yet because it suits my needs. If others would be willing to pay a small fee, whether it's a one-time fee, a monthly fee, something like that, that's when you start to add in those features of server-side persistence and things like that.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
I just love the amount of libraries out there, the amount of projects that you can leverage. I used the Fluent UI library for Blazor again on this project, and really love the work that Vincent Bai and others have put into this, because it makes prototyping and rapid application development such a breeze to get something working and deployed.
Yeah, for sure. If you've done so many things with Blazor and with Microsoft-based web technologies over your career. If you're going to kind of fast forward in the future, you see some of the things that Microsoft has done. They're pushing Blazor, they're pushing Maui, they're pushing .NET Aspire. And with your level of experience, if you're to fast forward us into the future, what types of things do you think are worth making a bet on, where you know that they're not going to be canceled, or we have an industry trend going? What are applications going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And how should that influence decisions we make today?
Well, I would say, for me at least, C# is a safe bet, because the C# language is the underlying technology that I use for all of the application development that we've been talking about, whether it's server-side APIs, backend microservices. Now we've got UI frameworks, UI technologies like Blazor and .NET Maui for mobile development, for desktop development. There are third-party toolings and offerings like Avalonia. There's just a variety of those things now, with being able to develop and deploy application suites with .NET Aspire. Really makes it easier to get these enterprise level applications developed and deployed. Adding in the advent of AI and ChatGPT and others, there's no telling what the future is going to look like, even as little as 5 years into the future, because things are changing so very rapidly. We can use ChatGPT or Copilot within our IDEs. We can ask it questions. There are a variety of services out there like bolt.new that'll spit out entire applications for you with a single prompt. I think the role of the developer in this is going to be continuing to develop or continuing to define the application architectures or the constraints, going to be translating user requirements, gathering user requirements, and implementing those in the way that is expected through whatever the tools look like at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's so many people talking about how to apply the current generation of artificial intelligence and GPT and the various models, and there's a lot of confusion about, okay, I hear the example, I see the chat bots and all, but what can I do now? So I ask you, what do you find that you're already doing, as opposed to, okay, look into the future, and I think I'll be able to do, but what AI tools do you currently have in your tool belt, and you've already habitually, reached for them multiple times a day?
I reach for Copilot and ChatGPT daily. I'm using them as almost as a pair programming session. I'm developing, quickly. Practicing my test-driven development. I'm making sure that I understand the requirements that I've gathered or that have been handed my way. I'm feeding maybe the requirements through ChatGPT and validating and verifying my understandings. I'm looking for improvements. I'm asking about any bottlenecks or any concerns, whether it's performance or security or something else entirely. I'm using those services as a pair programming session, and it's really helping me to continue to be as productive as I can and push out good quality, testable, tested, maintainable applications.
Nice, nice. And as we close up, like we introduced you when you came on the show, you're an independent consultant. You do contract projects for others, and how can people get a hold of you? What types of projects can people get your help with? And just kind of tell us about that so that the right people who are listening know if they should pull you into their project.
Sure. For contacting me, you can always reach out, john.callaway at outlook.com. If you're interested in the six-figure developer podcasts, we still have those as an archive. We've kind of put that on hold as the three of us have kind of moved from the locations, and we're getting our feet back under us. But yeah, the types of applications, the types of engagements that I find that I'm productive and bring value to are greenfield applications or rewrite functionality, migrations from older technologies, working as a solution architect, working as a fractional developer, and moving into that vein. And so that I can either be an individual contributor and write code, or I can be a leader of a team and mentor them and introduce good patterns and practices. And really, it's tailored to what the needs of the clients are.
Nice, nice. Well, listener, we'll include all that information in the show notes. If you have a project where John could be of assistance and bring his long tenure of experience, which is quite extensive, give him a shout and yeah, pull him in. As we close out, we've kind of talked about RetroPie and installing .NET software on a tiny little Linux board and integrating there, and then using Blazor in various contexts. For the listeners who, some of the listeners who haven't even done web applications or haven't used Blazor, where would you point them to get them started ramping up on Blazor?
Ramping up on Blazor, there's a number of folks out there that are doing fantastic videos on YouTube and plural sites and things like that. I'm interested and continue to look forward to and follow and recommend the Fluent UI Blazor framework. So there's some videos and tutorials on getting started there, and that helps create um, a polished looking front end and user experience. And I think that that's valuable because that's what the general consumer, the general user and client is looking at. They want to see a polished user experience, and then figuring out the paradigms in the back end for persistence and for application scale and so forth. So I would look at fluentui-blazor.net is a great place to go.
Got it. We'll include that in the show notes. Okay, awesome. Well, John, thanks so much for coming on the Azure and DevOps podcast and visiting with us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Jeffrey, thanks so much. Appreciate it. It's always a great time.
Oh, my pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.